Last Night in Soho is the latest movie written and directed by Edgar Wright, also written by Kirsty Wilson Carnes, and it stars Tomasa McKenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy, Terrence Stamp, Matt Smith, Diana Rigg, and it's about this girl who's going to art school. No, she's going to fashion school, and eventually when she goes into Soho, she begins experiencing weird visions of the past from the 60s involving this woman played by Anya Taylor-Joy. And she believes that this woman has been murdered and believes that the killer is still alive. So now she's trying to find this killer. So the trailers for this movie, honestly, Edgar Wright is one of the few directors out there where you just have to say his name. And I'm just going to be there. Like Christopher Nolan, Tarantino, I'm just going to be there. Edgar Wright has earned that. I don't think he's ever made a bad movie. And I've been really curious about this. Even though the trailers didn't really interest me too much, like the first trailer didn't really show too much. And the second trailer may have shown a bit too much for me, but it's like, okay, let's wait and see this movie. Let's see how this movie is. And I'm so glad that I got to see this movie. This is weirdly Edgar Wright's most mature movie, and it still has some of his flair there. So I do really enjoy this movie overall. I mean, I do have some problems with it, but I'll talk about that. First off, the acting across the board is fantastic. Tomasa McKenzie as the lead, I thought she was really good. I thought she conveyed a lot of the scenes very well. I thought that her arc is fantastic. Anya Taylor-Joy is also really good. Even though she may not be a big part of this movie, she's really good as this woman from the past. Diana Rigg, I also thought was really good. Terrence Stamp, he was really creepy in this movie. Matt Smith, he was fine in my opinion. Also, Michael Ayo, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but the guy who played the boyfriend in the movie, I thought he was really good too. Pretty much every performance in this movie is really good. You'll never hear me complain about a bad performance in an Edgar Wright movie. So they're all really good. Also, the soundtrack for this movie is really good. Like, Baby Driver had a fantastic soundtrack, and this movie has a pretty good soundtrack as well. A lot of diversity in its music. It's really good and fits well with each scene. Also, the production design is also really good as well. Like when this girl goes into the 60s, it's really fascinating. The cinematography is also really fascinating as well. It's really cool. Also, this movie it's very scary, and not for the reasons I think people would expect it to be. I kind of figured it was going to be something different because it was from Focus Features instead of something like Universal, because they were going to take an interesting turn with its themes and such, and they do. And honestly, it's scary not because there's horror elements in there, but because of some of the real world stuff that this movie alludes to. It's actually really frightening to see these scenes, and it's actually really creepy to see. Also, this movie, even though it's his most mature movie, there are moments in this movie where it's actually kind of funny and purposefully funny, and I thought that worked. Again, Edgar Wright's flair is there in his comedy and his editing, and I mentioned with this in the second trailer, I mentioned that I felt like when he premiered this at TIFF, they were like, hey, please don't spoil this movie, and then he released a trailer, and I thought, oh, you just spoiled the entire movie, should I see this now? I would still see it, but I just felt like the trailer showed too much. No, the trailer showed you nothing from this movie. Oh my god, I'm actually really surprised by that. I'm really glad by that. That is amazing. I didn't predict a lot to happen, but I'm just glad that I didn't predict every single thing that happened in this movie. So I'm really glad about that. And the movie addresses so many themes in this movie, and I thought it worked. Isolation, how if someone moves to a new place, and even though you can be surrounded by people, you can still feel alone. I do think that a lot of themes did work out in this movie. I thought that was really well done. And pretty much, again, every performance is really good. The music's great. Production design, incredible. So, are there any problems? Sometimes the messages are a bit iffy at times, where it's okay, I don't know if, that's really the best way to go about this, but I guess it can kind of work, given the story. Sure. Also, there is a twist in this movie. Of course it is. Of course there is. And it's slightly predictable. It's kind of I guess I kind of feel like it's Jordan Peele predictable. You kind of know the outcome, but you don't know why they're doing it. So I'm glad about that. Also, some character motivations, I felt like they just didn't really make sense at times, particularly Terrence Stamp. I felt like, even though he was really good in this movie, I also kind of feel like it's unnecessary when you find out a lot about him. It just doesn't really work at times. I don't want to say it doesn't really work, but it's like I kind of had questions about that afterwards. But overall, Last Night in Soho, again, I'll say this. It's Edgar Wright's most mature movie, and I kind of thought, oh, this is going to be a different movie from Edgar Wright. I mean, it mostly is, but his flair's still there, his editing is still there, his comedy's still there, even though it takes on a more mature subject matter than most of his other movies. I still think this movie's really effective. It's pretty scary. It's funny. The performance is really good. The production design is fantastic. Cinematography, great. Everything about this movie is pretty good. But I just have like one or two problems with like how the story actually plays out in the end. But overall, I would still recommend this, especially if you're an Edgar Wright fan. I'll give this, for right now, I'm going to give it 3 out of 4 stars. See it? So, what's your favorite Edgar Wright movie? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat, and stay safe.